So we're not doing this one at our usual time of, midday.
Yeah.
So therefore, more drinks than usual.
Is that like we've been drinking on every single one?
No, we haven't. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, one time was Red Bull.
That's true. Yeah, stimulants don't count during the day. Just a strange thing.
The most important decision of your day is when to switch from coffee to wine.
We gotta learn how to improve this. So, my name is David Herbst. I'm the state director with Americans for Prosperity. I do things there. I do all kinds of things there. That's not what I'm doing here. This is our thing. This is
not paid by anybody. We're doing this for free. My name is Kyle Mack. I used to do things at Americans for Prosperity. Now I do a bunch of other things.
You're not defined by your short career at AFP, of course. Kyle is an author of sorts.
Sort of, yeah. Things are being worked on right now.
Aspiring.
Mm-hmm. But mostly, I'm just a cryptocurrency enthusiast.
Few people, other than authors, get to say they're aspiring. Actors, authors... Like, no one's an aspiring lawyer.
I mean, if you're going through if you're taking the bar, you're an aspiring lawyer, right?
Whoever says that, though. I'm an aspiring landscaper.
Yeah, but, being an aspiring anything, everybody's just like, okay. Okay.
I'm an aspiring political philosopher. Actually, if you're going to put me in that category, aspiring political philosopher.
I guess you could put me in that same category. I'm just an aspiring philosopher.
Oh, man.
It doesn't really matter the category.
That's true. I just think my specialty is politics because if you ask me to talk about aesthetics, I will probably die in the process.
That's probably true. What are we talking about today?
Epistemology. No, you just got me thinking philosophy.
Yeah, well, no, you got us both thinking philosophy. That wasn't me.
You're right.
What should we talk about?
Well, the election happened. What the dealie?
Yeah, the election happened, and
this is why we shouldn't
wild.
care about the election.
Why shouldn't we care?
No, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure when I say that. Political atheism as the concept. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have 24/7 coverage of the election because it wouldn't matter who's president because the president couldn't tell you how to run your life in every single aspect in a totalitarian way. And I mean that technically, in a total way, not in a bad person way, which is what we mean when we mean totalitarian in the common parlance. What we mean is in a total way, in every single aspect, whether or not you have a job, who you can, well, we don't really have who you can marry anymore.
Without the news and politics on the news every day, who would tell us when we can go outside?
Or who gets to work, or who gets where you can get to consume, where you get to worship.
What time do you have to leave the bar? Right.
That's just another one. Which we've always had that. It's just that everyone's pissed that it's early.
Well, now it's in what. That's specifically New York.
I mean, the amount of population that wanted to stay at the bar after 2 a.m. was pretty small, right? Most people are like, that's fair. I think I'm done. It's 2 a.m.
Well, 2 a.m. is just a Montana thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, if you go to New Orleans, those people go 24/7.
All night,
all the time. But, overall, those later times for bar closures and stuff like that, those are small populations affected by that, right?
Well, it's
but now it's everybody, so now people care.
Well, the strange thing is, what is the scientific decision that actually goes into making that time limit? Because now you're just going to have more people going in and grouping together at specific times instead of it being dispersed, right? Theoretically?
I don't know how it actually plays out. I mean, I don't think these are actual epidemiological questions. Epidemiology being the study of diseases in a population.
Oh, none of these are epidemiology questions.
Right. Well, they kind of are.
This is all politics, right?
Yeah,
it's all politics.
That is a topic. That is a topic we should talk about.
One second. I'm going to put that on Do Not Disturb because my phone is just vibrating in my pocket right now.
That is a topic. There is an enormous gap in the way we talk about science and the role of science in politics, right? Because there's a just role, right? We want science to be able to tell us facts about the world, right? We want, and particularly, science is not a state, an end state. Science is a process.
No. We want science to be able to justify our biases. That's how things work with politics, though.
Right.
It's never about actual science in politics.
Yeah, that's an ought versus is thing. So is in science is science are all the things that justify my biases, right? kind of regardless, I don't actually have to understand what my claims to truth or facts are. All I have to be able to say is this scientist justifies my worldview, or this study I particularly like justifies the things I was already committed for. A great example, minimum wage.
Because apparently it's going to be our example for that's what
everything is the minimum wage argument.
We're going to be the best minimum wage experts.
Well, I'm going to make listeners the best minimum wage experts ever, because for some reason I care a lot about it. I don't know why. So a great example is that you have a lot of people who simply look at the issue, start out with the idea, I'm pro-union, or I'm pro-increased wage for whatever, or I'm pro-business. And then what I'm going to go do is go out, find the information that justifies my biases, and then load that into my rhetorical gun and pew-pew at the bad guy, right? That's how politics is done, unfortunately.
What an excellent analogy. I love that. And then I pew-pew at the bad guys. That's a great way of looking at it.
Right.
'Cause that's exactly what it is. Because... Like that's how social change works, is that you have people that are essentially crafting the ammunition for your arguments, and then you're just like pew pew, and then we're fighting, then we're duking it out. Like that's how this whole game
well, that's
works,
how it
right?
often is, right?
Yeah.
The ought should be, well, no, we're engaged in a process where I'm saying, like, look, I think minimum wage creates unemployment. I think minimum wage is because I can justify this study. And then the step beyond that isn't just the study that reinforces that, but rather understanding the underlying logic, the way it works in the human decision-making process that would lead someone to believe that that's how prices work, or understanding that's how supply and demand works, or that's how marginal utility works. Understanding the concepts that make up the argument, that should be what we look to, right? And then studies help us understand how it plays out in the real world when we actually observe the phenomena. The thing that bothers me the most is that people never actually do the thing where they have to try to understand
that's
the
my
thing
question.
that they're arguing for, right? They just say, like, well, the science says can't be the way it works, right? It has to be...
Well, and nobody actually looks at the science, right?
Well, not just that. It's like, people do. Like, some people.
Yeah. There are some people that do, but people making arguments, like,
right,
they're just repeating
and it's
things
rarely
that
as
they've
clear
heard, right?
as it just so happens all the science justifies all of my beliefs or my policy positions.
Yeah, some people that are scientists of X domain, X field,
right,
argue this thing that I believe, but then there's also these other people, but they're the fraudulent scientists,
right?
Like, and that's how people generally, I think, view things when it comes to all of a sudden when politics muddies the waters and all these ideas,
right?
So how do we bridge that is an ought problem though, right? Because like there's very clearly the is that's going on. Like everybody's talking past each other. Nobody's actually doing any real science. Shouldn't say nobody. I'm doing broad generalizations. Blah blah blah. Like I don't want to have to clarify myself.
What you do is you look to the people who are doing the real work and you raise them up. You feature, and then you have people do the actual.
Or you censor them on Twitter.
Yeah, well, that's an avenue if you have the power. But I don't think that actually embeds in it its own destruction, right? The only we didn't release this episode, but we did an episode. Our first attempt, our beta attempt, was I kind of explained this idea that politics is Newtonian,
yeah,
right, and it's also kind of Taoist in this way that like if you push on something in politics, it creates its own pushback, right? A force creates its equal and opposite reaction in politics. So if you censor someone, you create the situation where people create censor-proof social media, or you create Parler, or you create the next generation of social media, or whatever. Or it has the Streisand effect, right? It's another great example. If you censor something online, it actually gets more popular. Now, to apply the science thing, the more people diffuse and say, well, use science like it's a bludgeon, or like bullets in a gun, the more powerful people who actually engage seriously with science become, right? Because or the facts on the ground, right? So, for example, right now there's a huge market opportunity for people to articulate this simple idea. I think mask mandates, while in a laboratory situation might appear to reduce infections, in the real world don't. There's so much data to support that suggestion, right? All you need is someone who's really looked at that data, really understood it, and then can articulate it well, and you have a huge market opportunity to get a whole bunch of people into a new political position, because that's what people are looking for, right? At least the people who are open and are marginal in the dialogue, not Twitter, the rest of society, like where everyone else is. I think a tremendous amount of society is looking for people who are experts, who are dealing in the facts, and are willing to articulate. Within the political.
I'm not convinced that a tremendous amount of society is willing to engage with facts on that level. Like, most of it just seems to be, I have my tribe and I have my tribal signaling, right, and now let's go to war.
Yeah, it's
and that's the is, like, that's the clear is, right? Like, it's not how I wish things ought not be like that,
right?
But that's how things are as they stand.
So
like,
the way I think it was like an iceberg. Right? You have what you're citing is the top of the iceberg, right? All the political people who are always into politics. There's an enormous amount of people who are below the water level on that, and that's how you get to those people, right? And right now, those people are having their ox gored. That's why we have these historically high turnouts like we did last week.
Well, that also could just because all mail-in voting, right?
Both.
Like, you don't have to go in.
We have both evidence. We have evidence of both, right? So even in counties in Montana, for example, where there wasn't all mail-in voting, still historical turnouts.
Yeah.
And on top of that, when you measure excitement for the election, it's historically very high.
Which
it's
probably a result of COVID.
Because
right?
everyone's being affected by politics.
Everyone's Well, and also, politics is our grand sport right now. Right. Like, it is more popular to be paying attention to what's going on, what the orange man in office is doing, etc., than it is to, watch the NBA finals.
Right.
Like, and we have the data that kind of shows that right now.
Right.
So, like, that's probably where the level of excitement goes. But I still don't think that that's necessarily correlational to people wanting to get facts from the science, right? Like, people are just still picking and choosing their team, right?
Right, that's true. But you have more persuasion power if you're dealing in it. That's what I'm saying. Like, you have more people who are open coming your way who aren't. And on top of that, it doesn't happen in mass, right? It doesn't happen. So what I wanted to dispel is that there is a fiction that we sometimes tell ourselves that just say, like, if my argument is coherent enough and my facts are true, everyone will believe me.
No,
yeah. That's false, right? We know that's not true. Emotion comes first. Reason comes second.
That person usually ends up having to take the hemlock. That's usually
or just
historically speaking,
or just waiting until their opposition dies. So in college we read this book. It's the Revolution of Sciences. I feel like that's right. And basically what it argues is, like, scientific revolutions don't actually happen the way scientists often say they do.
Yeah.
Like, when they present the evidence, all the science looks at it, they say, oh man, that totally
normally
realigns my worldview, I'm going to change.
Normally real scientific, like, evolution comes with what you're talking about. There's tremendous pushback.
Right.
And people that are making strides and innovations are usually ostracized by the entire scientific community.
Right.
That's usually what happens.
But that's also why courage is a virtue.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
That's why we encourage courage, right? That's why we talk about that concept, is because anytime you're doing an innovation in the
that's
economy,
a topic I want to talk about,
or in terms of science and knowledge, you're going to have pushback, right? And it's not going to be... So, like, to finish the point, scientific revolutions happen more often because the opposition dies off from old age than it does from people reconciling the facts.
Well,
now, that doesn't have to be that way. That is a thing that is cultural, and it's other things. Like, there are exceptions to that rule. Like, for example, Einstein changed the minds of a lot of people in his life, right? Newtonian physics was overturned in his lifetime. It didn't require him to die before we, or even that we could even prove everything that was in Einstein's, theories. Although a lot of it was proven in his lifetime. Does that make sense? So, like, we do have examples of where that happens, and in the best societies and in the best individuals, what we find is the people who are open to change. Because then you're not stuck in old mental models that don't apply to the world anymore, because the world is complex.
Well, yeah, because what often happens, and this is where, like, pessimistic's not the right word, because I'm always optimistic about human evolution. But, like, usually on the short-term things, I get pretty pessimistic.
Right.
But, like, I know, because creative destruction usually kind of solves this thing. But what you end up having is you have really bad science that usually gets promoted for several decades. Those people go on to be college professors and teaching and handing out masters and doctorates based off of that science. And that kind of continual motion continues to grow and grow and grow. But then and then anybody that kind of goes against what is currently like scientific law will then be coming in, and they continue to get squashed, and that's usually a very painful process for a lot of people. Right?
So it's both though. It's like it's exceptional that we have the value sets that say that people should change based upon the data, right? That's the exception historically. If you zoom out beyond the last 100 years, right? If you 300 years, if you look at the scientific revolution that's happened since the Renaissance, it's more amazing that we have the set of values that say we're going to all participate in this good faith exercise where we're going to confirm each other's data, we're going to confirm each other's arguments and conclusions, and we're going to challenge our individual biases through control mechanisms. That's exceptional, right?
Yeah.
The weird thing,
when it happens,
right?
That's the thing,
and it does happen.
Yeah, it does happen.
Right.
It's just like I think it's more rare than people like to think it is.
Right. Well, we don't want to create a delusion out of that, though. That's where we're cutting strings, right? That's the whole point of the podcast. We don't want to therefore assume that that's what happens. It requires vigilance to make that happen.
Yeah.
It requires people
I agree.
who limit their own pride to make that world a reality. It doesn't just happen on its own because we've decided that's what culture or what science is.
Well, yeah, because there becomes it's the Hayek thing, right? The idea of scientism that comes, which is kind of this idea of like the worship of the experts,
right?
Regardless of actually paying attention to what they're doing and stuff like that. It's just like, well, they're the experts. It's science, and that becomes its own it becomes its own like pillar that you kind of got to disrupt because it's just like all fraudulent that comes up in it.
There's the concern of like
it's not any like real. There's nothing real of substance that's coming up in that.
Right, it's like the new priestly class.
Yeah, that's exactly
that.
Like, yeah, you got to listen to the high priest. It's very much that type of a thing.
But so like that's
there's a tremendous lack of humility that exists in that.
So what we want to do is we want to understand that is the human default. That's where everyone starts, right? Is exporting the hard work to someone else who appears to have already done all the hard work.
And that's the appeal to authority, right? Like,
Right.
That's a logical fallacy that you learn in any logic
But it's also
class.
the division of labor.
It is.
Right?
Yeah,
So like
exactly.
It is both natural, it's assumably true.
Well, and there's hierarchies that form because of it.
Right. And sometimes it's based on merit. Sometimes it's legitimately the best thing you can do, right? I'm not an expert on the Second Amendment. I know that as a political person, right? I know a little bit about guns, but I'm not going to be able to tell you the ballistics of a,
No, that's not what this podcast is for.
Exactly. So like I'm gonna export that to somebody else, right? Because I just know that's a weakness, right? The difference is the people who are doing that in bad faith, right? Who are exporting to scientists who would never or claiming that they would are people who would never say that are indeed saying that, right? Which is like every epidemiologist believes that a mass mandate and a mass shutdown in perpetuity till we all have vaccines and we all get 3 tests a day.
Well, because
are all agreed on this one topic. That is of course false, right? Or people who do scientism tricks to say things like every single climate scientists agree with this, or even 76% of climate scientists agree with this. What you're saying is a study posed a particular question that 76% of climate scientists agreed to.
Which then got adopted by the UN or something, right?
Right,
and
right. Which could be
could
that,
be accurate
that says
or
something
could not
true
be,
about
right.
the world, but you've decided to take that one isolated true thing and create a larger context in order to move at a political agenda,
so
rather than to talk about what's true in a good faith sort of way. Does that make sense? And that's the distance. We don't talk about good faith nearly enough as a culture. We don't say like that's a bad faith argument because that's hasty generalization. It's
I don't really know what people mean by good faith, bad faith, to be completely honest.
Right.
Because it just seems to be another way of just saying, you're in bad faith, I don't need to listen to you anymore, right? Like it just seems to be like an ad hominem attack.
It can be used that way, but it can also mean like...
Yeah. Like I understand like there's probably some realism to it, but like it's one of those words like when people say things like pragmatism or like democracy, it's like what do these even mean anymore? Like they're just like my side good, your side bad, and it's one of those words that are used to describe phenomenon like that.
I think people are dealing with that in reality. But that doesn't mean that there aren't good and bad faith arguments, right?
Exactly.
And part of the effort is to detect between people who are honestly engaging in a space and honestly saying, like, look, I feel this way because of this reason, and you can detect that by how they communicate, humility when they communicate, concepts like that, right? They're willing to change their mind, honest to goodness, good faith, as opposed to, I'm here to manipulate you. I'm here to gain political power. I'm here to do these things. And one of the problems that we have, right, with postmodernism is it distills everything into a bad faith argument. It says there is no such thing as a good faith argument, which is simply not true. Like, that can't be true because, like, how do you explain all the people changing their mind about things when that happens? I've changed my mind.
I don't think mind changing is necessarily a correlated to good faith or bad faith. Like, you can have your mind change from either, right?
It's not good faith or bad faith in the functional sense.
Yeah.
But when I change my mind, it's because I'm acting in good faith.
Because you're acting.
Who changes their mind?
I was thinking, like, not you as the recipient, but the other.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It's possible I could change my mind because someone paid me to do so, right? But I know that's not why I changed my mind on that topic. I know it was because I came across new information that made me reconcile something, a value that I didn't realize I needed to reconcile, or a fact, or an argument I never heard before.
Yeah, because I guess one of the reasons why I'd say I'm pessimistic on it, and again, I hate saying I'm pessimistic. Like, it's not the accurate.
There's definitely a tension between us.
It's not the accurate word for it.
Right.
It's just like I'm seeing so much of, like, the monopoly of certain ideas, and it's becoming more. I'm seeing it become more and more with specific ideas, more and more of, like, this has to be the solution to this problem,
right?
And there can be no others,
right.
and you'll straight up get unpersoned if you go against it in any fashion,
right?
Like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, the corporate press, whatever.
Right.
That's what I'm pretty concerned with, and I'm pessimistic in the short term about right now.
Right.
Like, I think we're going to see something come up where that's no longer an issue. Like, I think there's going to be some creative destruction that happens over years, but in current time right now, that's what I'm concerned about. Because, like, you go on a YouTube video, you're watching, something, say, about climate change or whatever. You get a little disclaimer under that YouTube video right now. On Twitter, you'll get the same type of thing. It's like, well, actually, it's just like, this is disputed, and just like, and it's so clearly, it's like, no, you're supposed to believe this one thing. Like, scientism is becoming a very predominant aspect of the culture. Right. And it's becoming a pillar of the culture.
So I'm not... Right. There's two ways to think about that, and I'm open to that interpretation, right? But I'm also thinking there's like an infantilism. There's like an infantilizing of the person in that. It's like, if I read a tweet, of course, what I'm getting is that person's perspective, not the endowed truth of reality, right? Not like a revelation.
Well, that's what I assume whenever I'm on Twitter.
Exactly.
Right?
Like why do I need Twitter to tell me, hey, this is a perspective that some people disagree with?
Because, like,
of course I believe that. I'm on Twitter.
But what we have right now on Twitter is Twitter's Truth and Safety Council being like, no, this is the confirmed thing. It's widely disputed in the public, but no, this is the confirmed thing right here. That's the problem that I'm having.
Exactly.
And then you have a lot of people just being like, well, that's the confirmed thing.
But even then...
But then you also have the pushback of it,
right.
And a lot of people being like, well, that obviously can't be true then.
Right.
Because, like, it goes both ways.
Right. It's part of that... Is it part of that latchkey culture, though, that says, like, the role of the authority is to protect you from discomfort? Right? The role of society or the business or the school or whatever is to shelter you from discomfort. And so that's why we need disclaimers on things, because, viewing this, you might feel discomfort. We need to tell you that some people dispute this because it makes you feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? I don't think it's...
I think another aspect of it is they're worried about the rabbit holes you go down because you end up adopting some sort of belief about something.
Right, which I don't know. I don't think that works, though. I don't think that's how it works. I think my guess... And I don't know if this is a novel interpretation or not.
But I also think a lot of it has to do with power.
Right.
A lot of it's political.
Right. A lot of it's to get certain electoral outcomes or to get political power outcomes. But I also think it's something people are demanding.
Global political outcomes as well. It's not just United States politics.
Right.
It goes much bigger than that.
I think it's demanded for by people who want to have their biases confirmed, and they're not getting it enough. That's the weird thing. Like, everyone's concerned of everyone who's like me in the intelligentsia space is concerned about echoes, right? Echo chambers, except for the people who actually use this in mass. And what they all want is an echo chamber. So when they get on the Twitter and the president tells them something they think it makes them feel uncomfortable, they feel like it's Twitter's. They demand Twitter to censor that person or to add a disclaimer or whatever, right?
Because what I'm seeing, and this is going to be a bit of a deviation from the science aspect, but it goes into the censorship aspect and with just contemporary what's going on with politics right now. Because like right now we have Donald Trump claiming election fraud on mass level, etc. We have, the left saying, oh, there can never be an election fraud in elections, right? Like we have that dynamic that's going on right now. And then you have Twitter saying this is disputed. Yeah. But then also on top of that, you have Kayleigh McEnany, I can never say her name, the press secretary, Trump's press secretary,
right?
Is saying at the podium, like, yes, and we're looking into these claims of election, and then you'll have name news outlet organization. Oh, we're gonna pull away from that right now because obviously what she's about to say is false. You have it going on Fox News, MSNBC, CNN,
right?
Like, there's clear, like it's clear propaganda that's existing right now,
right?
Because like real journalism
done in bad faith,
yeah,
right? It's
definitely bad faith, right? Real journalism or real science would be looking at these things and saying, okay, let's take these things at face value, let's investigate, let's see what happens,
right?
But instead it's, no, you can't look at this.
Right.
Can't look at the other side of this argument.
So like that part
that's the thing that's sketched to me.
That part of that, I think, is a demand from the people who want their biases confirmed and don't want to come across information that makes them feel uncomfortable.
What people? This is 50% of the population one way, 50% of the population the other way.
Right. So I think it's that a particular group that has the loudest voice and whose priors agree with those corporations and companies. That said, also, we also don't want to look at it and make the same error that you mentioned earlier, which is assume simply because that those corporations and those people don't like it and are censoring it or adding context to it or adding disclaimers or whatever, that therefore it's true. For example, the Donald Trump administration saying we have affidavits isn't the same thing of presenting affidavits. Saying we have people who are claiming this is not the same as saying this person is claiming this. Right? One is evidence. The other is is a claim to evidence. Right?
And
so a lot of people are
perjury.
One mistake that I'm making right now. A lot of people I see making right now is drawing the conclusion of a thing that actually hasn't happened yet. Right? Saying that you have having people who claim that there was election fraud happened isn't the same as actually presenting that evidence. Right?
So we haven't gone through the legal court battles.
Exactly. And then what happens is people confuse the cases, right? They confuse the Dominion story with the U.S. Postal Service story.
No, they're separate instances.
Some guy scraping a New York Times website to claim that there's some, switching of votes based upon the data from a New York Times website, which doesn't make any sense at all. Because
although that the U.S. Postal Service, we should talk about that. That is a wild.
It's a wild story.
It is a wild.
Anyways,
story.
let me finish the data scraping
thing.
There's outright bad faith things happening on that side of that docket too, that people in that place, that if that agrees with your priors, that's where you're most dangerous, right? If the corporate press themselves are suppressing a story, that doesn't make other people from other sources not also could be bad faith actors as well. And you need to be skeptical of any time someone says, oh, I found it. I've got the smoking gun on data fraud in mass. You know why? Because that's really, really hard and expensive to do.
It is.
If it were to happen, it would change everything. Everything.
Well,
so
assuming
so you got to do your homework.
Assuming it would change everything. Assuming you have a lot of people that aren't acting in bad faith.
Yeah, right. Well, what I mean is like
that's
what I mean when I say that isn't what the inevitable results would be. It would be a lot of the system is designed to prevent that sort of thing from happening. So if that were to happen, it would be exceptional, and I think everyone would agree with this. It would be very exceptional, and it would be difficult to reach on to scale, right? So it's one thing to identify a couple hundred ballots that were lost or thrown in the trash or something like that, or dates that were changed on a couple dozen ballots or something like that. Or even hundreds of ballots. What's hard to get to is 20,000, right? That's the kind of numbers that we're playing with when we're talking about the results of a presidential election.
But if the Dominion story ends up to be true, it could be. We could be looking at 80 to 100,000 in Pennsylvania.
Right. There's different stories that scale differently.
If true.
Well, you saw me react to this. You
true.
saw me react to this. Like we've been batting back and forth these fraud stories for a while. I was like, well, that looks like it could be the result. Like I saw a video of a guy. He was at a wedding and he just rented out this wedding venue after it had become a polling place, and he goes into one of the garbages and it's a bunch of ripped up ballots. All of them happen to have Trump.
There was one Biden one, they said.
Yeah. It's pretty wild, right? It's an example. Once again, fraud happens. We know it happens.
Yeah,
right?
but that's going to be like 50 votes. Right?
It's just
like,
hard to happen on scale, and that's usually the left wing critique is like the best faith left wing critiques is like, yes, it happens, but it doesn't happen on scale to affect an election of this sort. Although it is really bad when it happens, I don't think anyone thinks. I'm doing a hasty generalization. A lot of people who argue that aren't saying that it never happens. It just doesn't happen on a scale to affect what we're looking at when it comes to Pennsylvania.
I mean, look at like Bloody Tuesday is a phrase for a reason. Bloody Tuesday was the reason that President Truman got elected was because the mafia was stuffed 80,000 ballots in Detroit. Hey, it's Kyle making a quick correction. I was conflating two stories together in my head. What I meant to say was Truman's friend Tom Pendergast was a political boss in Kansas City, not in Detroit. Through the mafia, he was involved in a massive election fraud scandal, and I'll link the FBI documents in the description below. It's a wild piece of American history. Back to the show. Right, and 200 people also got slaughtered in this thing because of this, or like election fraud has happened on massive scales in the past. Right. Like we've had points where we've had entire states that were so corrupted where we've had to have like revotes that have happened in the past. Like it's not that uncommon for these things to actually happen.
And it's under prosecuted. There is good evidence there too where we have like a really bad incentive system where you have an attorney general who's elected by democracy, and then you can expect them to, once they get into office, to go back and like adjudicate the thing that elected them, right? Which is a problem, right? But once again, that doesn't mean that it's happened, right? Well, we actually have we need to have material and substantial evidence in this case. We have some, but they haven't reached scale, except when the Dominion story came across, and we were talking about it, and I was like, "Oh man, this could be the one." If it is, it's going to be that.
I was reading some stuff from there's this like big tech nerd that's been really digging into the software on the Dominion stuff, and apparently is now in talks with Rudy Giuliani too. So this is being talked with Trump's legal team. And he was saying everything, like, there's a lot of things that require further investigation, but just from the software level, it's just like, it's with the software, it's very easy for you to be like, once votes hit a certain level, switch all votes to start moving on this direction. And like, just for like a tech nerd to just be like, I'm president now. Like you can very much do that with the way that the software is designed. And very limited network security. It's very apparently, according to the software engineers, apparently it's just a really poor network security. Right. So it's just like, when it comes down to it, could be possible. I'm curious to see how it all pans out.
It depends on what happens in the facts.
But also remember the Dominion stuff. We had Klobuchar and Warren also put in legal cases against Dominion during the Democratic primaries, because there was a lot of sketch stuff that happened with Dominion in the primaries as well.
Really?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing there is, like, this has become a political football. It has become a thing where if you want the Biden presidency, you decide, no, it never happened. And if you want the Trump presidency, you're like, oh, just wait. It's all going to come crumbling down like a house of cards. We're not there yet, guys. We are not there yet. We need the actual facts. We need the actual witnesses. We need the actual whistleblowers, if they exist at all.
Yeah.
Not to mention, you Trump people need to keep your eyes open, because you also have a tremendous amount of money flying around here, and people asking for more money to pursue these things. This could be a fundraising mechanism. You realize this, right? I mean,
it could be. Yeah, it very well could be.
I'm just saying, this happens in politics, and I know there's a lot of new people who got involved in the Trump wave who might not have their eyes open to the fact that, there are a lot of perverse incentives in politics to raise money in situations like this in order to fund kind of ghost campaigns. So just be careful. Just use your common sense. Keep your eyes open. And always, if something fits with your priors or your desired outcomes, that's when you have more skepticism, not less.
The one thing that moves me in the direction where I'm like, I can see how this wide scale fraud could be a thing. Like there's one thing that really moves me in that direction. Like absent of all the shady things that we're kind of seeing right here, like this is absent of all that, is just how much the media clearly just hates Donald Trump. and what we're seeing with Twitter right now.
Yeah.
Because normally when a president lies, the media is a cheerleader for it. Yeah, across all presidencies. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and you can go on with
Thought
all
they
the
changed
war
their mind
propaganda,
on
right?
that. To be fair, like they were on board with that, and then they weren't.
Well, it's a little too late.
Right? I know.
Like it's a little
I'm just
too
saying,
late.
you can measure it by 2002, or you can measure it by 2006. The media likes to measure by 2006.
Yeah, but I think at the
Libertarians,
time,
2002.
at the time, we should be looking at 2002. But
That's our
also,
principle, right?
but also, how we've seen clear deep state coup attempts over the last 4 years from the FBI with Comey and like with Schiff and the anonymous whistleblower out of the CIA, like all this stuff. It's like there seems to be something that's different that's happening than past presidents of recent decades, right?
Right.
Where there's oddities.
So if I were a skeptic of that claim, how would you articulate the case for the deep state and the corporate press kind of being in the same pocket trying to end Donald Trump? Like, why would that be true, and how would you kind of make that argument?
Well, you could do the kind of fantasy version of what MAGA people will typically say, where it's just like, well, he's clearly going against the deep state. He's fighting for the people. Sure, like that might be true. Like I won't discount that. But policy-wise, for instance, what we're looking right now, like we just saw purging happen in the Pentagon, right? Just mass firings that happened across the Pentagon. A bunch of the people that he just put in are people that have been very vocal about pulling troops out of Afghanistan. Like people that Scott Horton from antiwar.com have been saying would be awesome to have on Trump's cabinet.
It's a little late.
It is a little late. It's a little late. But also, we've talked about before, which is like, how much can the president really get done in this stuff in all this time? Especially when we have going through Russia collusion stories for 4 years and impeachment and all these things. When all of these were like, he's getting impeached for nonsense. He's getting impeached because of Burisma in Ukraine and looking into the Hunter Biden story, which is now also clearly censored by Twitter. So it's like there's all these pieces here that it's just like, I clearly don't know everything that's going on.
Right.
But there's a lot of just like, if you're to just like look at it, you're just like, what is going on here?
If you're unwilling to simply ignore facts, right? If you're going to look at everything that looks to be true, based upon what we have confirmed, there definitely is hard to walk away with the conclusion that there isn't some kind of institutional pushback, right, that's happening that is more than just a policy decision.
And the question is like, why is the institution pushing back so hard against Trump? And I don't know. Like I have ideas on why that might be, but like some of it seems to be foreign policy rhetoric. Some of it seems to be just like him clearly being like the military industrial complex. And like I think he's the second president to ever use that word. Eisenhower being the first when he's like warning people. Yeah.
So like some of it, so the foreign policy one's clear to me, right?
But like when it comes down to it, when it comes down to a lot of like, some of the stuff that these people that really don't like Trump really do like would be his Federal Reserve policies. Like he's been completely with them on the Federal Reserve side of stuff.
Right.
So it's just like, where exactly, like what exactly is going on?
The only place where he's really criticized,
and none of us can really know what's happening behind the scenes in these types of things.
Because the only place that's really criticized the Fed is in the Fed not being federal enough, or at least not being loose enough with money supply.
Well, he called for negative interest rates, which is something like that.
We're assuming everyone listening to this knows what the Federal Reserve is.
But
think about that.
And this was actually something I was thinking about coming here though, because the Federal Reserve, quasi-private public bank that just prints money with zero interest.
Technically 12 banks broken up
technically.
regionally. It's more closer to a cartel.
Yeah, hands out money for banks to give to us for a bunch of interest.
Well, a little bit of interest. Interest rates are very low, but they
But
artificially
zero interest on the Fed.
They artificially set the price of interest, which is the price of money.
But like, because like technically, the Fed is private.
Right. It's created by Congress,
really.
but it isn't actually subject to
Yeah.
like certain things that you would guess by someone being
Something I was thinking about on the way over here actually is there an argument that, because you get the idea that the media is the fourth branch of government, right? Is there an argument to be made that the media, because we clearly know with things like Project Mockingbird, CIA using the media to control things. I think we talked about that on a previous podcast.
I don't think we've talked about Project Mockingbird specifically. Let's talk about that first.
Okay.
Real fast.
So,
what is that?
Declassified documents. This actually came out in the JFK release files that Trump put out, which was interesting. But it's something that's been always speculated on forever, is that the CIA was planting agents into all the major news networks, into all the newsrooms, to be able to control narratives around the country. Like, this is a thing that is happening since Kennedy, right? I think Kennedy is when that's kind of started, is around that time. Like, it wasn't under Kennedy's orders, but it was happening during that time. It was in the 60s. And it's quite clear we see all these agents that come out of the FBI, come out of the CIA, get correspondent jobs on all these places, and they keep all their what's the word I'm looking for? Access. They keep all their access. And something that Trump has clearly done is he cut off those ties. He removed access from like 250 of these people that are retired CIA people, right? Brennan is an example of this. And Brennan is one of Trump's biggest critics. And what that does is, because they're no longer getting paid by the CIA, but they have all their access, and that's what makes them valuable inside of corporate newsrooms, right? So that's essentially the idea behind Project Mockingbird. And something Trump did was cut that funding.
Right.
He cut that stream.
Or at least the permission for them to be able to still have access to.
To have access. But that's their whole value, right?
Right.
Now their value is just, we hate Trump.
Right.
And it's like, CIA guy says he hates Trump. NSA guy says he hates Trump. Ooh, Trump's a bad guy. Ooh, right?
Okay, yeah, so connecting that back. So that's what Project Mockingbird is. It was an effort by the CIA to influence media here in the United States. CIA, important to that too, if you don't know this, CIA specifically chartered to be an intelligence agency for foreign powers. Like, it's to fight the Cold Wars, to fight the Nazis, not to
control things domestically.
Of course, right? Of course. Like, yeah.
But so, like, I think there's a clear argument to be made that, like, from a libertarian perspective, to view the media in the same way that we view the Fed.
Right.
Because, like, the Fed is technically private. These media agencies are technically private. But we should still have the same degree of skepticism of all these media agencies as we do the Fed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, it's one of those memes about libertarians that says, like, you don't care about corporate power, when obviously we do. Right?
I think you underestimate how many libertarians are just like, private company can do what it wants, can't criticize it.
Well,
I think you underestimate it.
Yeah, I mean, I just never found it.
I was just having this argument with a libertarian yesterday.
Really?
Yeah, like a libertarian we know.
It's kind of embarrassing. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong.
I think there's a lot of libertarians that they like there's this frustrating dynamics inside of libertarianism that has just been blowing me away for the last several years. It's just like, you go to a restaurant, you get a cold steak, you're supposed to complain about it.
Right.
But, like, I think there's, like, this libertarian notion of, like, private company can't complain about it.
Yeah.
And that's how they're viewing, like, the corporate power.
Right.
Right? So,
Yeah.
like, when you see Facebook banning my account, right? There's, like, private company, can't complain about it.
Yeah.
Like, there's this... Like, it's a meme that exists inside of libertarianism,
Yeah.
but I think it's like a very
got some truth
pervasive.
to
I think
it.
there's a very pervasive.
Well,
meme
there's a
to it.
difference. It's
Right.
easy for people to confuse the politics from, like, a normative statement, right? Because we're always in the position of saying your norms don't necessarily mean good policy. Great example. censoring on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. Just because they do that doesn't mean the FEC needs to repeal Section 230 or
and
create a fairness doctrine.
Somebody that has now had 2 Facebook profiles censored.
Yeah.
I don't think we should repeal 230.
Exactly. So,
but I am going to criticize Facebook and Twitter
of course you
like
can.
nonsense because
you can.
I think they're doing terrible stuff right now.
We've been criticizing mainstream media for a very long time on the right wing.
Yeah, but I think that there's this thing inside of the Liberty peeps that is, do they hate the state, or do they want to be seen as recognizable and credible by the New York Times?
Yeah.
And I'm using the New York Times as an example.
Well, there's nothing wrong with
like the New York Times is a microcosm of like the media zeitgeist.
You would agree there's nothing wrong with wanting to be seen as a good faith actor that is positively engaged and respected for that.
Like,
right.
I'm not sure how useful being seen as a good faith actor by a bunch of bad faith actors is how useful.
If they're the people who are the gatekeepers, I mean, and you want influence, isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, but it's just like everybody that ends up going that route, I feel like their influence just diminishes and diminishes over time.
I don't know.
And a lot of them times they lose.
It can happen. Don't get me wrong. So like
that seems to be the norm of what happens. Right?
There is sometimes a cost. There are certain people in the liberty movement also who are like, oh man, you're productive, you get policy changed, you must be a sellout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think those are mutually exclusive though. Like,
yeah, I know. Yeah, but I'm just saying like either temptation is like we've discussed this before. Some people are allergic to any amount of success.
Yeah,
right? Because the reason why they became a libertarian is to be edgy and to be on the outside.
I think that's definitely a problem.
Yeah, you get any amount of political power or capability to affect political outcome, and they freeze up and they don't know how to act.
I think that's definitely a problem. We've seen that with people that have criticized us before.
Right. So the question is like, how do you do both? How do you be a good faith actor that is engaged positively, that is talking to outlets that other people respect, even if you don't necessarily like or agree with them, right? And like
what I'm saying
the Fed is actually a good example. Like if you could go to the Fed and be like, hey, I want to abolish you, but I also kind of feel like a rule-based deciding process would be better than this willy-nilly, we're just going to decide what monetary policy is tomorrow or whatever. If you could be marginally better, and that's not necessarily the ideal, that's a good thing, right? And we need to have the kind of like difference between principle and tactics to be able to distinguish between those two things. Also, without every time someone just says, hey, I think we should move to a rule base, without everyone behind them saying, you're a sellout, you don't want to abolish the Fed.
I think it goes both ways, and I'm critical of it both ways.
Right.
It's just like
both are problems that need the solution to those things are like a more refined approach that says that distinguishes between a political prescription and a normative criticism.
Because I think both of us are generally zoom out guys. We're looking at very big picture. You're somebody that operates very much in the zoom in though.
Yeah.
Right. So you're in a unique position with that, like with everything that you do, because you're looking at very like this policy change for 2018 legislative session and this policy change, and you're doing all these things. Right. But you're somebody that has the bigger picture in mind. There's a lot of people that don't have the bigger picture in mind.
Right.
And there's a lot of people from the bigger picture perspective that don't have the little picture perspective on some gradualism needs to happen to be able to get to your big picture. Mm-hmm. So like there's always that dynamic. Mm-hmm. But what often annoys me, and it tends to be these types of people that just my experiences, I'm sure it happens on the other side. A lot of the people that operate on the little picture day-to-day aspect are incredibly people that are on the like looking at the big picture from like they're looking at they want to make sure we don't end up in like gulags or something like that, right? It's like people that
really big picture
people that are looking at the big picture. Yeah. It's like they'll be looking at those and they're just like, yeah, those are the bad ones. Those are just the bad libertarians. They're not real libertarians. They're just off in their like goofy fantasy land right now. Mm-hmm. But like those are the prophet archetype, right? If we put this into like an archetypal story narrative, like those are those types of people, and these types of people are often just like they're just not going to get anything done, blah blah blah, and they're just very dismissive of them,
right?
And often it's these small picture people. It's just like, for instance, when COVID initially happened, What we had, and I was very disappointed in libertarians with this, I saw libertarians across the board. I saw tons of libertarians criticizing Thomas Massey because he looked like a dick. Like that's what they often would say to him for saying, "Hey, maybe we should all come in and vote on this thing so voters can actually see where we stand."
I didn't see any.
I saw
a lot of Republicans.
I saw a lot of Republicans, and I saw a lot of libertarians.
Really?
And that was something.
You're making
for
us
me.
look back, Thomas.
That was something. But zoom out a few months.
Yeah.
Where are we now?
Right.
Thomas looks pretty good right now.
Yeah.
Right. When you actually look at that.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I'm sure Ron Paul paid a cost from the war in Iraq and all that stuff for the short run, and then it turned out in the long run.
But that's the pattern that I'm seeing that that makes me very disheartened with libertarians these days. Is like that type of thing. It's just like it's a simple thing. Like Thomas Massey did the right thing.
So what is the solution to that? Like, what is the value that people should embrace to prevent that from happening? Like, to me,
courage. Because I think that we're living in an age where our vices and our virtues are flipped. Like things that should be seen as courageous are seen as cowardice, and vice versa. Things that are cowardice are actually seen as courageous. And this goes into like deep existential philosophers. Like look at Dostoevsky or somebody like that. Like who's warning people about the comings of the Soviet Union. Like that's the type of stuff that he was talking about in his books.
Right.
And that's what I'm feeling right
Take
now.
A step back, though.
Right.
What I meant was like the distinction between the people who are kind of in the trenches versus the people who are more high level. Mm-hmm. To me, it's always been a question of just openness, right? So like letting all flowers bloom. If you believe, so it's a funny thing, right? Because you can have the proscription of everyone should be more tolerant of other people. They should listen more, speak less, like concepts like that, and actually put them into practice. What that looks like is a bunch of people who are like, I don't understand what you do, but I'm open to hearing about it and open to hear about, and then I'm going to ask questions about how it connects to my vision for the world. If we profess the same political philosophy.
This goes into good faith, bad faith. Like a lot of people are just kind of stuck in their way, and they're not going to be.
Or they're bought into the brand. They're bought into the brand of being a Beltway libertarian or a non-Beltway
or whatever. Like whatever
Mises
the
Institute or a Reason person or whatever. Which has always seemed to me to be a deficit of openness, right? Of listening to other people and what their actual concerns are. If you believe everybody who disagrees with your immigration policy is just a blanket racist and there's nothing else to it, you're never going to learn anything from anyone else. Right? You're literally in the position where you've decided that 55% of the population or 45% of the population, depending on the margin of error, is just blanket racist because they disagree with you. And it's not a place where you can grow, evolve, or even see the world very clearly.
Well, because one of the things, and this is kind of what I was getting at with some of the Trump stuff earlier, is over the last 4 years, something that we've seen is clear government corruption and propaganda that's been very pervasive. And libertarians, in my mind, are supposed to be the people that see through that pretty clearly, because we have a very interesting view of what the state actually is that I think is accurate.
And that's the goal of the podcast, is to help people to be able to see through that stuff.
But I think what I'm seeing is there's a level of Trump derangement syndrome that will just put blinders on libertarians, and they won't talk about that stuff that's been going on, and they'll just be like, yeah, but we disagree with him on trade. There's like, we have clear examples of government corruption and propaganda that's been going on for the last 4 years. It's been very interesting, and it's like libertarians like barely talk about it.
Yeah,
and that's it's like, if there's ever a time for spreading the ideas, it's like clear examples,
right?
And it's like, not disagree with them on immigration, can't get on board. It's like, but like that's not what I'm talking about. We're not talking about trade or immigration. We're talking about government corruption.
Yeah,
right
it
now
can also be true
right?
that the deep state exists, which has been a libertarian concept for a very long time. Right, the deep state is the idea of
except for in the last 4 years. Right. Apparently, it hasn't.
A permanent bureaucracy of people who move from job to job to job, or even stay in the same job for decades, and make up much of the actual power structure that is the government. That concept is well grounded in fact. And the interesting thing is we haven't quite seen it weaponized against a president like we have the Donald Trump. That doesn't mean I support Donald Trump. You can believe that.
Exactly.
And without saying, that's who I'm voting for this year. There's like a dumbing down of the process and all the bad faith actors in that process that make people afraid to step out and acknowledge facts. That I think you're citing, and I think that's true.
Yeah,
You always say, like, to me,
that's something.
The
that
solution to
frustrates
that
me a
is to say, one, you know, a little bit of shame is appropriate. If you're that person that's been saying, I won't acknowledge that the Russia collusion story was probably BS.
Seems to be.
And appears to be
doesn't
orchestrated specifically to inoculate the Hunter Biden story.
There doesn't seem to be. There doesn't seem to be actual evidence of Trump peeing on Russian hookers.
Yeah,
like
that
there
never
doesn't
happened.
seem to actually be a thing.
Actually come out. Much like the actual evidence of Dominion fraud. We'll see. So, like, it's the accusation that it might happen, and then everyone reacts to the media story of the accusation that it could be true, and then it actually becomes true. Okay, here's a great one. To kind of de-emotionalize it away from Trump, and this is one of the best examples. There was a study after the 2008 elections about a quote from Sarah Palin saying that she could see Russia from her house.
Yeah, that was actually Tina Fey.
That was SNL. That's the great... It's in, like, an enormous amount of people who voted believed that she had said that. Why? Because it became such a meme. That's the power of memes. So if you don't understand how ideas work or how memes affect society, which is not an easy sort of thing to understand, you can understand that it is actually more powerful than the fact. It can be weaponized as more powerful than facts. Then what you have to... like, it becomes incumbent on the individual to try to distinguish between facts and memes, right? Especially in a democracy. Virus protection. It's very important.
Yeah, it's very
Watch
important.
out for that.
I should have muted my computer. So
Audio only listeners. But yeah, man, I think there has been a failure on that. I sense your sense of like disgust.
Yeah.
On that failure.
Well, it's because like the only people that talk about it are like Dave Smith, a comedian. Like he's like the only person that I've seen talk about that on any level.
Right.
Like Tom Woods maybe a little bit.
Right.
It's like where are people? Like where are the communicators?
And Tom tends to run more of like a philosophical, educational show.
And,
while David's more
and that's why
events.
he's not. Well, and that's why I give Tom credit because like, he's not. You know, and it's like Michael Malice maybe, but like, he's not even like really like he's libertarian, but he's not the same kind of type of libertarian really.
Right.
It's like, but like, where are all these people that like it's just been so frustrating to me is like seeing this stuff. Because maybe it's because like I've watched a lot of these press conferences and I've kind of seen the BS that's just gone through, but it's just like libertarians, where are you guys at?
Yeah,
it's like, is it just like, and I think it comes from a level of Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
Like I don't think it's as pervasive as like the left, where it's just,
it's also
just nonsense.
For some people, it's like you want to accomplish something of substance, and other areas are completely unrelated to that. And you have allies right now who are either waiting for you to be on the Trump train, and they'll only work with you if you are, or people who, unless you are completely opposed to him, will not talk to you.
But it'll even happen just like outside of policy circles. Like you're just talking to general libertarians, that are, like among friend groups and stuff like that, and it's just like. There's just nothing there. Yeah. It's like, well, I don't understand why. Well, and like, things that happen.
I'm not surprised that the general public doesn't know that the Trump collusion story turned out to be completely false.
But I would, and that goes back to our media conversation.
Right. Like, if you, and the question is like, to what degree do the average citizen have a responsibility to actually see through those illusions and actually get to the truth? Like, I know why they aren't. But normal people ought to be demanding accountability for all that wasted time, right?
Well, yeah. But then, how do you feel about
follow?
It's because it's so interesting to me because like we've been dealing with Russia, not my president, illegitimate election, for the last 4 years, and now all of a sudden it's just like this is the time for unity.
Yeah, that's
fascinating, right? Like this is propaganda. Right.
I've always found it interesting. I've seen this a lot too in kind of like more local politics. Is that when left wingers win, when Democrats win, honestly, the Republicans just kind of leave them alone and be like, you won, oh fine, I'm gonna go home. When Republicans win, I see all these messages, specifically on Twitter, which is an interesting psychological measurement. It's like a dipping stick, right? We kind of get like a sense of how the political class thinks when you look at these sorts of messages that say, I want you to know that you represent me too. It's like, no, you don't understand. That's not how democracy works. Like, that 51% won. You lost. He doesn't represent you. He represents the people who won. You know that, right? Like, that's how this works.
My president.
Exactly.
Not my president.
Right. Which is it's a really bad mental model. It misunderstands what democracy is, and it misunderstands. And they try to create a system of power that they don't actually have
Dave,
in order to try to get them to change who they are.
Democracy is a mythology.
It's so selfish.
Like, democracy is a complete mythology.
Well, yeah. it has a mythology, right?
It's kind of just, it's all really a mythology. Nobody actually cares about democracy. They just care about the outcome that comes from it. That's all that matters. Like it doesn't. If
you're referencing like the "not my president" thing, like everyone says, "Oh, I'm
or policy." Like
yeah.
even if it's a policy, like if you're for weed legalization or you're against weed legalization, you're not just like, well, democracy said, like
right.
the God of democracy has dictated, all the people spoke, and now we're here, and now we have weed legalization. Like if you're completely against it and you think it's the devil's lettuce, like no, you don't care about democracy,
right?
Right?
Yeah, and it works both ways too. Like if
or vice versa. Like it's the same thing.
All the people who just lost aren't going home and be like, well, I guess I'm not a Democrat anymore. I mean, we've elected
I was like,
Republicans.
well, yeah, now we got this,
or vice versa.
Yeah,
right.
Like no, like it's all.
It isn't a value;
mythology.
it's a process, right? And like it, so my beef sometimes is that folks who say that and they therefore say, well, therefore we should be a monarchy or something like that. That doesn't actually follow either, because the classical liberals who were fighting monarchies and actually had autarchic regimes they were operating
to be clear, I'm not pro-monarchy.
I know. They are advocating for democracy for some reason. So, like, I'm always in this position where I'm like, wait, let's slow down. It can both be true that we religiousify the democratic process, and then we actually don't. It actually is a value amongst others, right? Having the authenticity that comes from popular sovereignty is useful in certain ways. It creates this feedback mechanism. It's this pressure relief valve that's really important in society to enfranchise people.
Well, the propaganda of democracy being the supreme good came at a very specific time.
Yeah, right. By specific people
in
trying
American
to weaponize
history.
it.
This was a thing that came through Woodrow Wilson as an excuse for
era.
going into World War I.
Well, it started before. Look at the changing.
The culmination started before, but
right.
it really became weaponized.
The value of the progressive era to say like what we need is more populism, more bottom up, culminated in, I can't remember which amendment it is, but changed senators from being elected by the state to being elected popularly. That change itself is a great example of that,
yes.
or other kind of like trust busting.
That came under Woodrow Wilson as well, right?
Yeah, that was
the Senate popular election. That came at the same time as the income tax,
right? 1913.
Right. Yeah, and the Fed. A lot of things happened that year.
Yeah, that was a big year. But that movement started with Teddy Roosevelt and trust busting, and culminates in that. So like all those ideas about like enfranchising the little guy and having more participation by more people in the government process, those are good. They're good liberal reasons in the classical sense for those values, right? What we don't want to do is go the alt-right way, right? Which is like saying there are problems with democracy, therefore democracy itself is the problem. We need more autocracy. We need less actual enfranchisement.
I don't think you have to make that leap. Like,
I agree. That's what I'm saying.
I think the idea of democracy is completely ridiculous. Doesn't make me like, oh, that means the alt-right guys are right. Like that doesn't mean that.
So, but it's important to say that in the right context, right? Mm-hmm. So, yes, absolutely. Democracy itself isn't the only political value. There are other higher, more important political values. That's why we believe in natural rights. Rights themselves are a higher political value than democracy. Everyone should agree with that, right? But we don't talk about it in those contexts, right? Because we don't. Often in the battle of politics, what we do is dealing these like really simple absolutes, right? And weaponizing of concepts like that, rather than. And we do the same thing with rights. We say the only thing that matters is my rights.
Well,
right?
Because rights are made up concepts that we all have to subscribe to, right? Like they're very.
So is the idea, the value of democracy, right?
Yeah.
They're both
exactly.
They're
like,
both ways.
Like because like I don't really believe in rights per se, but like I have rights that I like. There's certain concepts that we call rights that I think are very conducive to making society operate very well.
Right.
Like one of the primary ones being property rights. I think that's a very primary. Like property rights are technically just made up things that we all kind of agree upon, right? But,
right. A way to think about it that I think is the most useful is think of it as a social technology.
Yes.
Right? It's a thing that we developed.
But social technologies are made up, right?
Like of course. Well, what depends on what you mean by made up. But yeah, just like stories are made up.
Yeah, exactly.
Or names are made up, right? Like what is an elephant? Mm-hmm. It isn't the word elephant. It is actually a creature that exists independent of the word. But when we say elephant, the elephant picture is in our heads. It's complex thing. The point being, social technology is probably one of the better ways to think about it, right? Because it's something that we evolved to handle a certain range of problems. The problem is that it can both be true that we abuse that term, and the embedding of abusing that term, such as religifying it, saying it's the only value that matters, and then the opposite of that, it creates its own blowback, which creates the more autarkic sort of new movements, right? Like in the alt-right, in organizations like that really want to disenfranchise people, believe in an ethno-state, want a certain class of people to be in charge. And
I don't think that. I think there's a lot of things that happen between that leap. Right?
Well, I'm identifying what I see as a through point, right? Which is that.
No, there's a throughput for everything.
Right, we religify these things, and they create their blowback. And I think the alt-right is a blowback of that religiousification of those things, and other, ways of kind of creating this. It embraces the state in that way, but it also says
it depends what you mean by alt-right. Like alt-right has become such a poisonous term that doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Right. So like there was a time when the alt-right encompassed a lot more people than
because are you talking about Steve Bannon or are you talking about Richard Spencer? Right. Or Michelle Malkin. I see what you mean. Like Michelle Malkin is not a white ethno-statist, right?
Okay,
but she's considered alt-right and has been deemed alt-right.
I don't know about whether or not Michelle Malkin is,
but she's Asian.
Right. Once again, what I mean is like a more autarkic, authoritarian style right-wing populism.
Well, right. Yeah, because like alt-right has just kind of become like
it's possible
constitutional nationalism. Like that's what alt-right.
Maybe
a lot of those people are.
I don't know.
Like Richard Spencer is a socialist. Like he's like you can't put a lot of these people that are classified as alt-right into the same category, right?
Maybe, or unless the through point is just like right-wing populist nationalist, right? I mean, like that could also be
sure. But then
and Michelle Malkin can fit in there. She doesn't have to be a racist. Yeah. There's just a racist branch in there.
Yeah. It's just like populist nationalist is also Bernie Sanders, right?
Right.
Like
it just happens to be right wing.
It makes these
and he's not.
Like that's the only difference. This is like quasi capitalism versus non-capitalism.
Right. And then you have left wingers, which include Richard Spencer, who's a left winger nationalist, but he happens to be racist. So that for some reason
for some reason that's right wing.
Yeah,
right.
Which is
like this is the propaganda output.
Right. So we're trying to splice between these. What these people actually believe, what we say they would. The whole point being, there is a pushback. It happens. People read Hoppe and they say like, well, therefore, and like there's a whole lot of other things and facts to be open to.
Hoppe wasn't arguing for monarchy and democracy, the god that failed.
Exactly, but people draw lots of conclusions from it. Yeah. Even if he was, or even if that's his personal point of view, like an anarcho-monarchist state.
I'm not even looking at Hoppe for it. Like, democracy has been widely criticized by all the people that we're supposed to deem as great philosophers for 2,000 years.
Such as Socrates.
Socrates, yes. Which I had a tweet on that recently. Socrates was a deep critic of democracy, and then democracy killed him.
Yeah.
Because in Socrates' whole point was it's absurd to just assume that everybody, just because more people are voting, now all of a sudden that makes everything good. Like Socrates very much believed in like a division of labor when it came to voting. It was like, if you're a specialist in something, then it makes sense. Sure, have all the specialists vote together and kind of the smaller group on this thing and all this on that thing.
Right.
But the idea of just being like, this person that knows nothing about this person in this industry that knows absolutely nothing about things in this industry is now supposed to vote on that thing. It's like that's absurd.
So there's lots of things that apply like that in terms of like democracy as not being the single primary value, that the only thing that matters. Localism matters. Like what level of power is the government? Who is exercising that power? Rights matter. The concept of liberty matters. The concept, all these things are actually in tension with one another. And what it does is like the actual political battle sometimes gives people the impression that the rhetoric is the reality. And then they lose the context of the greater tension, and then they make really drastic and terrible mistakes. A great example is the COVID response. What we're reacting to, so much of what we're reacting to is the technocracy of the problem.
Yeah.
Of the fact you have unelected Board of Health members or governors who are very removed from the people who elected them, instituting rules that affect wide swaths of society with no democratic feedback mechanism because it's so far away from an election.
Have you read Governor Newsom's Thanksgiving mandates?
Yes, yeah.
It is wild.
Yeah, it is
It's like there's rules about singing. Like the level of intrusion into day-to-day life.
My favorite part is you have to do it outside, but if you want, but you can let grandma use the bathroom. Like that's the weirdest. Like you can go outside and use the bathroom, but that's it. You have to let people serve your food for you, so you got like appoint a server.
Well, you can't have things in Like, think
Large-
everything has to be single serving. You can't have just like, like the turkey is just here and everybody's dishing up from the turkey.
Right. You have to do everything with stovetop or not. What are those microwave meals? Like, that's the only way.
The level of it's like what 2020 has shown me is just how willing people are just to go along with nonsense. Like,
yeah,
that's
how I
something
distilled it
2020.
was never underestimate people's willingness to be told, to be
Yeah.
ruled, to be told what to do, to be ruled by someone else.
like I was
It's
talking
easy to
about,
underestimate, especially for our value set. It's easy to mistake that other people think the same way you do.
I was talking about this with a mutual friend of ours the other day. Was because I very much see a lot of the wokeism stuff that's going on right now is very reminiscent to me of Maoist struggle sessions. But the one of the I was talking about this with a friend the other day, and this is there's this dynamic because a lot of my friends have been talking with me because of my recent Facebook banning that happened. But then just like a lot of people are getting banned from all these social media sites everywhere, and how willing people are kind of just, and it kind of goes into like, well, it's a private company, they can do what they want. It's just like a lot of the struggles, like the struggle sessions weren't government mandated things. These were things that people voluntarily, you could call it spontaneous order. These is things that people voluntarily went and did. Like in Romania, when the fascists had Romania, like the Marxist leaders that would eventually lead the revolution in Romania, part of their renegade aspect of themselves inside of the fascist internment camps, they built up their Marxist movement inside the internment camps before the Marxists took over. Like all the main leaders, they had struggle sessions, and this was their resistance to the fascists. They called themselves anti-fascists. Fascinating. Yeah, but like these were voluntary things that happened. Like the censorship was all very voluntary. Like in Cambodia, you had like voluntary militia groups that would spread this stuff absent of government involvement. Like not everything is just all clear about the state. Right.
Well, it's what it distinguishes is that some people think libertarianism or the values of liberty or the values of a free society, however broad you want to draw that line, is just a prohibiting the state and state power. When it's also a set of positive values, right?
Yeah.
So positive. When I say
that's
openness,
something that's missing, like a lot of times in the conversation.
This is what I want. This is my dream. My dream is to encourage a engagement from people who believe in the ideas of the liberal tradition, to not just be prohibitive of state power, but also to be positively encouraging an actual set of values for people that people ought to behave by, and not in a lame way, not in like a wagging your finger at anybody who doesn't behave that way, but in like this is how you make your life better way. If you live your life by mutually beneficial arrangements, not codependent relationships, you will do better. If you are open to new ideas, experiences, and ways of thinking, your life will improve. It will have a higher quality of life. You'll create less conflict with the people who are already on your side. If you're more open, right? You'll find new people whom you can learn from and new ways to advance your worldview. All kinds of values that reinforce the liberal society. I mean that in the classical sense. The society that evolves and creates human prosperity can be embodied in the individual and expressed to people. And then if we encourage those values, we do better both as individuals and as a society. That's everything we've been circling around is that problem. Where
I agree.
And it's the inability of, and specifically, if I can just lash this message one more time, it's the inability of the people who should know better to stand up and say, "Look, guys, we need to encourage openness and tolerance and these sorts of things." And then an inquiry and dealing in facts and good faith, those sorts of things are the antidotes to the problems that we're describing here.
I want to circle back on something I said and link it with that, because I'm not sure that you understand what I'm saying when I say some people care too much about what the New York Times thinks about them.
Yeah,
it's that thing, right? It's this right there. Is that they care more about what public perception is of them than actually instilling real values and talking about real things.
Yeah.
So they're willing to make these weird like psychological compromises. Like it's okay to make political compromises here and there because that's how politics works. You gotta you gotta have these give and takes like that. But like when we're talking about actual ethics and values and psychology and just like your own psychological health in some ways,
Right.
And value judgments like that, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is I see it there to be this like compromising of values, not compromising of politics because that's going to be what happens. But a compromising of values,
Right.
and that's something that I see is very pervasive.
Right. So like wanting the official opinion makers to like you,
And also circling with something where I see that our vices and virtues are flipped, and similar to something that we said on episode that hasn't been published yet, where I was talking about heroes versus anti-heroes.
Right.
It's the same type of concept.
Right.
Where the hero is what society deems, it's the embodiment of society's current values. But if your vices and virtues are flipped, then be the anti-hero.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm seeing right now is that our vices and virtues seem to be flipped. in
Anyone
society.
with a true north has to be the anti-hero in this environment. It's Ron Paul put it like truth is treason in the Empire of Lies.
Yeah. It's
Right. So
that
like
concept,
that concept of like when everybody's headed a certain direction, and that direction's the wrong direction, the best thing you can do
Exactly.
is to be a heretic, is to be the one that says this is the wrong direction, guys. And that's what courage is. That's what most virtues all play into that: honesty, courage, and like speaking the truth, articulating the truth, especially when it's unpopular, as you see it, but also being open and willing to learn and change, involve and grow, and actually like take on new perspectives, right?
And like your North Star might be wrong. Like,
Right.
you might not
Right.
have the right North Star. Like that's
embracing that
and
concept.
that's what openness is supposed to help you. Being like, oh, I've been misguided. You know, like that would be the concept there. But
Or just misapplying a value in a situation that you didn't realize it was actually applied to. So I like that idea, and I specifically like that concept where if we're saying the goal is to be the hero that says the thing that society needs to hear, how do we encourage more heroes? You know, how do we encourage a society where even though it's wrong, I mean, in like to me, the radical moment right now is where you can say, yeah, we disagree on some things, but we agree on this, and we're going to work together to make this good thing happen that we agree on. That's like the most brave thing you can do right now, because like that's the wrong team. I don't know if you know those people. That's Black Lives Matter, and those are the bad people. Or though that's a Trumper. That's a bad person.
yeah, well, because
It's breaking the tribal boundaries. That's the biggest way that you can actually, in order to serve a high ideal that makes yourself, your community, your nation better off.
Yeah, because and that's a thing as well, where it's like because like when I'm talking about like political compromise is not what I'm talking about.
Right.
Like if you're going to side with one group on criminal justice reform, even though you deny a lot of their stuff, what I'm saying is don't then all of a sudden adopt their entire framework on reality.
Right.
and I'm seeing drifts of adopting frameworks.
Or to actually reinforce it,
like-
because I agree with you.
Yeah.
If in pursuit of the acceptance of a certain elite opinion makers, you lose your values,
Right.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. You can be a good faith articulator of values and fail, right? Here's the sense. When I'm talking to a normal person, a non-political person, someone who doesn't deal in politics all the time,
Normies.
yeah, normie. No, like legitimately, I don't believe most people should be dealing in politics.
I wish most
24/7.
people didn't
Right.
deal in politics.
Exactly.
It's-
So in my value set, normal people are the people I do the thing I do for, is to get government off their back so they don't have to think about this, that. Sometimes when I'm articulating to those people, I don't always, it's hard for me to bridge the gap of years of thinking of these things to where they're at. And when I'm dealing with media, it's even more difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because you have a tighter time frame and less goodwill you're starting out with.
Yeah,
So,
very much so.
it's an important thing to like, some of it is we got to have grace with people who are taking on that job of trying to popularize an idea to the corporate press when they're in that role. On the other side, we also need to be willing to both receive and give criticism to people in that role. Be like, hey man, you messed up. You kind of violated this principle. with
Yeah.
that. And I'm just as concerned of like the libertarians who left for the Trump train so hard that now they're like, they're more trolly bad faith actors than when they were doing more intellectual work and hopefully in a better space. What I thought was a better space. More
I don't
contributed.
see that to be.
And
as,
that, I think, is a legitimate criticism.
I don't see that to be as dominant as a thing as a lot of left-wing libertarians say it is. Like the trolley libertarian left thing. Like I don't see that to be or libertarian Trump thing.
I don't know if it's big or not. To me, I've just
like there's people that have just jumped to being full
or the TDS,
stuff,
right?
but,
Once again, I'm just reflecting off what you're saying. Like the more left wing libertarians who are obsessed with criticizing Trump no matter what, who can't see anything good about him, who can't look at the obvious manipulations of the corporate press or of the
because like it's something because
I agree with that.
Like I'm still as radical as a libertarian as ever. It's just sometimes I feel like libertarians are kind of leaving me because like I've been very vocal about the things that I like about Trump, and then there's the things I dislike about Trump. But the things that I like about Trump outweigh the things that I dislike about Trump.
But that's a value judgment.
Like those are certain things.
Is the thing that allows you to say like I've made that calculation that. Yeah. Exposing the deep state's more important than trade. There are a lot of people who disagree with it.
I've like, and that is a value judgment that I've made. Like, I would much rather see the deep state exposed than like, and if I have to sacrifice some stuff on trade, then whatever. Like, I'm okay with that.
Right.
Like those are policy differences. We're talking about like the deep state is a much bigger picture thing.
And you have an argument about that. The and so like I'll expose some of my biases. Mm-hmm. So like. The deep state argument thing I think is compelling and important. Mm-hmm. Trade I find compelling and important. Immigration I find compelling and important. Like those are all things that are important.
Like the trade stuff is going to flip eventually. Like it's going to change
short term versus long term
thing
because it obviously isn't working. Right?
Because like the deep state for me is like it's one of the big illusions. Right. And I'm all about dispelling illusions.
Right. Like and then on top of that, like what was the other one? I had another one there.
Trade immigration would be.
Trade, immigration, as to do things. The other kind of the reflection of that, the inverse of that I see a lot is the disrespecting of the institutions, right? Like some people look at that and be like, hell yeah, right? Because I don't want a religiousified politic, right? I don't want Congress to be gods. I want them to be servants of us, right?
Well, that's the mythology, right?
Well, either one's a bit of a myth, right? I mean, they're the people who are exercising power over us too, right? So like, it's a liberal dream. A classical liberal. I flip around that so much, but what I mean is classical liberal when I say that.
We should talk about that at some point. 'Cause I've had that conversation with a mutual friend of ours. I like about the whole liberal word, like how useful it is anymore.
But it's an old school liberal dream to make the powerful the servant of the people who elect them, right? And that's a noble dream. Like that's something I'm very sympathetic to, right? And then at some point, post Civil War, progressive era. Into the progressive era, we kind of switched that. We kind of made him into lords, and like quasi deities. A great example of this is if you go to the Capitol building right now, and you look at the old House chambers, right when there was only 13 colonies, and what do you see there? You see Lady Liberty and a coiled up snake. That's it. That's the only thing in there. And then you go to the new Capitol dome. The new one, the big one built after the Civil War, or into the Civil War and then afterwards. And you look up and you literally see George Washington as a deity, like sitting there like Zeus, with the Confederate general like running away and like another guy like whipping him and like all these other actors like all these other politicians, deified in the way we talk about the founders, deifies them like. So I get it. I get the people who make that argument that we want to reduce the religification of that. But there is a legitimate argument that says, hey guys, we need these institutions to have some faith in them. We need to have some faith in these processes. Here's why. If you don't, you're going to push the masses towards more autocracy and less freedom. Because in the absence of solid institutions that people have faith into, they trust strongmen. And it's a legitimate argument that is the kind of the light reflection off of that Trump derangement syndrome, right? There's a legitimate argument in there that expresses itself in the negative way of like being unable to distinguish between, anything he's ever done well or having nothing charitable to say about, what he's done as policies or whatever. Or even if you like, say, for example, you support his work on First Step Act, you'd be like, but it's the first step. It was like, oh, come on, man. It's the first step in 20 years. Give him a break, like...
Well, nobody else has done anything about this.
So, like, there's a certain amount of uncharitableness and all that kind of bad actor faith that goes with the TDS phenomenon.
but also Trump devotion syndrome is also a thing, right?
Right.
Like, that's
Ooh,
also.
I
a
never
thing.
even thought of that. It's both the same acronym.
It's both
There you go.
TDS.
So, anyways, I hope you see what I'm saying there. Like, there's
No,
there's
I see what you're
institutional
saying.
question
It's
that's
just
in
because like
context.
there's definitely people that are using the religiosity to also create more autocracy as well. So
Yeah.
it's like I would rather I'm more concerned about those people right now than I am about the people that are just like, let's just go back to what the founders wanted.
Well,
right.
no, I don't know if that's. It's like we need institutions that that people have faith in.
Because
I think the only starting
to
premise.
me, we need institutions that people have faith in. Sure, but what happens when these institutions have become completely corroded?
Well, sorry,
that's
faith
the
is maybe the
problem,
right. A sufficient amount of trust that what they're great example. When everything's a lie and you can't distinguish between truth and lies, what do? It becomes about power.
Yeah,
Right. When nothing can be true, it comes down to who has the guns.
yeah,
Right. That's the whole problem of postmodernism. Is that the moment our press or our media institutions become where everything is false, right? And I've decided everything is false, then there's no reason not to.
Well,
take it
because it seems like we've moved, we're already kind of past that point. Because there's 10 journalists in America right now, right?
So
Right?
so it's both and right. You
Right.
can react to the reflection to say that the history of journalism is actually more tainted than people realize. There wasn't a golden era where everything was perfect. Walter Cronkite was like
it's a
et cetera.
mythology that's been wrapped up into a marketing package.
Exactly.
Right, after the there's a very clear point in American history where this happened.
Right.
Like back before the Spanish-American War, you had this paper is this one political view, this paper is this political view, and everybody was pretty transparent with their biases.
Right.
And we look back at that now, and we're supposed to look at it and be like, that's terrible. There was no objective news. But then so after the Spanish-American War, we're all like, it was a branding package that is just like, yep, fair and balanced journalism.
Right.
And it's like, but there's never been any fair and balance. Like it's never been balanced.
Yeah. Well, it's always had a
it's
worldview,
people
by
people
definition.
pretending to be objective. There's no such thing as unbiased journalism.
Right.
Like all the people that I like the best when it comes to journalism are all the people whose like I know where they stand on things.
Yeah.
Like I know
Their
where
politics are usually pretty left wing.
Yeah,
most
and
part.
there's some right wing guys that I like quite a bit, but like Aaron Mate, Glenn Greenwald, like these people, like I know where they stand,
Right.
But they're very open and transparent about it,
Right,
I
and
can
there's
take
lots
them
of
with
local
a grain of salt,
reporters
right?
doing honest work, where or even people who are
Yeah,
simple
There's local people that are
or
doing
simply
stuff, right?
doing press, and they don't even realize their own biases because they just don't have access to a broad enough set of information or the education to actually know that there are worldviews outside of the ones that they're actually sampling for a story. It's a complex world, and they're
That's
working on it.
and that's one of the big things is there's just a lot of journalists that just they're operating in a framework that they just assume to be true.
Right.
So and that's their bias.
Right.
Like they don't. It doesn't mean they're working for the CIA.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Right.
There's also
or
that,
George
right?
Soros' secret them paying them under the
exactly.
table. or
Like,
something
like a lot of it is just because you're accepting a framework that you grew up
and you went
with
to a
or whatever.
campus that was liberal, and your parents were liberal.
Like
and
that's a different thing. Like that's another thing.
So, and it's easy to mistake one for the other, right? Bad faith actors for people who are in that place who are acting in good faith, but simply are making an error, a category error, or like a knowledge error. They haven't sought out all the best knowledge in order to write a story, and they wind up with a biased story. So each one of those things to me is a market opportunity. The lack of being able to say what's true is a huge market opportunity for new actors to be able to engage in that space, right? Journalists that people fail to be able to trust because they don't seek enough knowledge create the new mediums that we rely on, like conversation podcasts, to do long form investigatory, in spontaneous, in the moment, kind of talking through and discovering new ways of thinking about things, right? Or, it's those things that create those inverse opportunities.
And we should maybe end on this because we're getting pushed on time.
Yeah.
But something that is another disheartening thing for me, it's just annoying because I've been very much into this social media space now because of the whole banning stuff. But now I'm seeing everybody doing this exodus to Parler right now, or Miwa, or whatever the other Facebook alternative
MeWe
or whatever.
Yeah,
Who the only thing that makes them different than Facebook and Twitter is just their creators being like, we're not like the other guys, but they're going to end up having the exact same problems. There's great alternatives that actually kind of solve a lot of these censorship problems, like SocialX, Steemit, Minds, like that are on blockchain based systems, which maybe we should talk about that at some point. But it's just like, and nobody's making the exodus to those. It's just like, why?
Yes.
It's like we're going to end up having the exact same problems with these guys.
Or it's just gonna be a right wing problem. Like
Yeah.
it will be like you can't post Vox.com.
Parler's already been banning people.
Really?
Yeah, like I've seen it happening.
Wow.
But so
There you have it. Well, there isn't easy solutions, that's for sure. And what's going to require to change the course of this is going to be individuals who choose to behave differently. And that's the people who run the companies to the people who consume the content and actually push things around. People who write the content, all that stuff. It isn't going to be a single solution to any of those things. It's a cultural shift we're looking for.
yeah,
You
I
want to
agree.
be
It's the
contributed to
cultural
that
shift.
cultural shift. That's what No Strings is about, man. Is trying to help people, trying to investigate and talk through these issues of where we have these illusions and how do we cut the strings that keep us from actually seeing the world as it is.
So you're not just
or
a little
actually
puppet.
becoming independent. Yeah, being an individual, not being a puppet.
Not being a puppet.
No puppets.
Cool.
Bye.
See ya.